welcome back. We are season 2 of When Women Walked, the podcast where we talk about people, places, moments that history somehow or, just forgot to mention. If you're new here, welcome. I'm your host, Madison, and this show is definitely for history lovers, but also just people curious, people who've always felt like something was maybe missing from the version of history they were taught. And as always, I like to start these by reminding you to find yourself in a safe space, get comfortable. We have a little bit different format this season, and I'm very excited to share some of these stories that I have queued up for you. A few other reminders. There's, the history that maybe you learned in school, the history that they put in the textbooks, but then there's other stories of exciting things that actually happen, some sad things, some things that are going to make you angry, but overall, some very interesting things we're going to uncover this season. And yes, oftentimes the things that are in the textbooks are different than, what I'm going to talk about. So again, today we're kicking off season 2, and I really couldn't think of a better way to start than with a story that literally has everything. Revolution, betrayal, military genius, international conspiracy, and one of the most devastating examples of economic punishment in modern history. So, yes, today we are talking about the Haitian Revolution. And now, before you think you know this story, I promise you don't know all of it, because the parts that get left out are really the parts that change everything. So, as I mentioned earlier, please get comfortable. We're all going way back to 1791. And by the time we're done, you might be a little angry, a little sad, hopefully a little inspired. But you're really going to understand why Haiti matters in a way that you probably never did before. So let's get into it. And I am outside also for my new friends. I love to be outside. So hopefully you can hear some of the birds chirping. It is early in the morning. I'm trying to beat the heat. So yes. All right, let's get to it. So to understand the Haitian Revolution, you first have to understand what Saint-Domingue was. So Saint-Domingue was the name of the French colony on the western third of the island that we now call Hispaniola, but today that's Haiti. And in the late 1700s, it was the single most profitable colony in the entire world. And I'm going to repeat that because I really want you to sit with that thought. Late 1700s, Saint-Domingue, eventually becomes Haiti, is the single most profitable colony in the entire world. So not just one of the most profitable, but the most profitable on Earth. Saint-Domingue produced roughly 40% of all the sugar consumed in Europe and the Americas. It produced more than half of the world's coffee, cotton, indigo, cacao. The colony was producing so much wealth that France was essentially running on it. And in 1789, the same year the French Revolution began, Saint-Domingue's exports were worth more than the entire United States economy. So again, let's pause and think about that also for a second. One colony more valuable economically than a whole country. And how was all of this wealth being produced? Yeah, you guessed it. On the backs of roughly 500,000 enslaved African people. 500,000 on an island that was roughly the size of modern-day Maryland. So the conditions were so brutal, so deliberately, systematically brutal, that the average life expectancy for an enslaved person on Saint-Domingue was a mere 7 years after arrival. Sit with that, 7 years. I think most of us can, think past 7 years into our future, but if you were an enslaved laborer on Saint-Domingue, you were most likely going to die within 7 years of arriving on the island. And the thing was, this wasn't news. Like, plantation owners knew this, right? They accounted for it. It was cheaper to work people to death and buy new enslaved people than it was to let them live and treat them like human beings. The colony literally ran on death. But France, they weren't worried. They got rich. But that being said, here's what the plantation owners miscalculated. When you pack 500,000 people onto an island, people who have survived the Middle Passage, who have survived enslavement, who have literally nothing left to lose, You're not creating a workforce subservient to you. You're literally creating an army, but they just didn't quite know it yet. So let's fast forward a little bit. It's August 14th, 1791. We're in the northern mountains of Saint Domingue in a place called Bois Cayman, which means alligator forest. And yeah, lives up to its name, right? Something happened that would change the course of history. A voodoo ceremony was held. Enslaved people from across the northern province gathered in secret. And a man named Duddy Boukman, an enslaved man who had been brought from Jamaica, led the ceremony and delivered what became one of the most powerful speeches in revolutionary history. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, so go with me, but he says, "The God who created the earth, the God who protects us, he has ordered us to take revenge. He will direct our arms and aid us. Throw away the symbol of the God of the whites, who has so often caused us to weep, and listen to the voice of liberty that speaks in the hearts of all of us." So after that speech, we fast forward 8 days, August 22nd, still 1791. The revolution begins. In one night, enslaved people across the northern province rose up. Plantations were burned. Colonizers were killed. The northern province of Saint Domingue was set ablaze, literally and figuratively. But here's where I need you to understand something. This was very much not spontaneous uprising. This was organized, coordinated, and planned. The leaders of this revolution were people who had been watching, waiting, and strategizing. People who understood the terrain of this island better than any French general ever could. People who were fighting for something that no colonial army had really ever had to fight for. Freedom, right? These formerly enslaved laborers are fighting for their freedom. They've had enough. So within weeks, over 100,000 enslaved people had joined the rebellion. And France sent troops, but they couldn't stop it. And Spain, who had controlled the eastern side of the island, tried to use the rebellion to their advantage, offering freedom to enslaved rebels who would fight for Spain. And some did, including a man named Toussaint Louverture, who we'll talk about more in a moment. But Britain also saw this as an opportunity to seize one. I was about to say one of the most profitable. No, we already talked about this. Britain saw it as an opportunity to seize the most profitable colony in the world. And Britain invaded in 1793, 2 years after the revolution had started. So 3 European empires are now fighting on this land, this one island, against 500,000 people who had decided that, yeah, they were done. So let's talk about Toussaint Louverture. He was born into slavery around 1743. And by the time the revolution began, he was in his late 40s, which in Saint Domingue, given the conditions and what we talked about earlier, meant that he had already defied the odds just by surviving. He had, outlived that 7 years and lived into what, was considered old-ish age back then. And he had taught himself to read. He studied military strategy. He was a strategic, disciplined, and brilliant leader. The kind of leader who could see 10 moves ahead in a chess game. Well, if everyone else like me is still trying to figure out, which pawn I'm going to move. So Toussaint was, again, way ahead of the game. And he initially fights for Spain. And then when France abolished slavery in 1794, and I want to be clear, France only abolished it because they were losing, needed some rebels on their side. So Toussaint switches allegiances and fights for France. And then he proceeds to defeat the British under, the French flag. But let me say that again. So the British Empire, the same empire that was building its own global dominance, had sent their forces to Saint Domingue, but Toussaint's forces drove them out. And by 1798, the British had lost over 25,000 soldiers and literally retreated in humiliation. This is going to be, the second war or revolution after the American Revolution that Britain's just struggling right now, right? So again, 25,000 British soldiers gone. So fast forward to 1801, Toussaint had unified the entire island, both the French and Spanish sides, under his leadership, and declared himself governor for life under a new constitution that abolished slavery permanently. So he didn't declare independence. He still technically acknowledged French sovereignty, But he was really trying to navigate an impossible situation, building a free Black nation while surrounded by slaveholding powers who honestly wanted him to fail. And then we get Mr. Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte decided that he'd had enough of this revolution rebellion. Napoleon had grand plans for a French empire in the Americas. And honestly, a free Black republic in the Caribbean was, in his words, and I'm being a little generous with the translation here, but it was not part of the plan, right? Not shocking, but in 1801, Napoleon will send his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, no affiliation to my favorite Formula One driver, but same name. So, maybe there's a connection. But Napoleon sends Leclerc to Saint-Domingue with 20,000 of France's best soldiers. Their mission, just crush the revolution, restore slavery, and bring Toussaint back to France in chains. So they do capture Toussaint through treachery, luring him to a meeting under a false flag of negotiation, and then they arrest him. He was then shipped to a prison in the French mountains, the Fort des Joux, where he died in 1803. And I apologize to my French speakers. If anyone is listening to this who knows me, they know I wish I knew French and had a French accent. Beautiful language. But anyways, so Toussaint will die in jail in 1803 in France. But his last words reportedly, "In overthrowing me, you have done no more than cut down the trunk of the tree of Black liberty in Saint-Domingue. It will spring back from the roots, for they are numerous and they are deep." So again, this call that basically you've just made Toussaint a martyr, and the revolution didn't begin or end with him. And he was right. After his capture, two of his generals stepped up, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe, and they finished what Louverture started. The French forces were weakened by yellow fever, which was killing European soldiers at a devastating rate. And facing an enemy who knew every mountain, every river, every path on that island began to fall apart. And Leclerc himself would die of yellow fever in November 1802. But the revolutionaries didn't just fight, right? They outmaneuvered. They adapted. They used the terrain. They used guerrilla tactics that European military doctrine really had no answer for, and they just kept winning. So by late 1803, the French forces were just utterly destroyed. The remnants surrendered to the British Navy, which it's comical because these French, military fighters would literally prefer to surrender to Britain than face the Revolutionary Army again. And as we know, Britain and France, they weren't friends. France had helped in the American Revolution, helped the revolutionaries there defeat the British. But so that's how, scared the French were of the revolutionaries. So let's fast forward. January 1st, 1804, Dessalines stood before his people and declared independence. He tore the white out of the French tricolor flag, symbolically removing the white colonizers, and sewed the blue and red back together. He named the new nation Haiti, from the Taino word Haiti, meaning land of high mountains, reclaiming the name the indigenous people had given the island long before Columbus ever arrived. So Haiti becomes the first Black republic in the history of the world, the first nation ever born from a successful slave revolution, the first country in the Western Hemisphere to permanently abolish slavery. So let's sit with that for a moment. So again, the first Black republic in the history of the world, the first nation born from a successful slave revolution, and the first country in the Western Hemisphere to permanently and forever abolish slavery. So in a world where enslaved people were considered property, not people, not soldiers, not even capable of self-governance, Haiti looked the world in the face and said, yeah, watch us. And they won. So now we get to the part of this story that most people don't know. The part that makes me pretty angry every single time I think about it. So Haiti will win its independence in 1804, and the world, specifically France and the United States, we're going to make them pay for it for the next 150 years or so. So obviously France refuses to recognize Haitian independence. And in 1825, they show up with warships, 14 warships and an ultimatum. So, just over 20 years after independence, France comes back and France says, you're going to pay us 150 million gold francs, or we're going to blockade your ports, destroy your trade, and bring you back under French rule. So you might be asking, okay, 150 million gold francs, but for what? So France says for the loss of their property. The property being the enslaved people who had freed themselves. France was demanding that Haiti, a nation of formerly enslaved people, pay France for the financial losses caused by their own liberation. So what's Haiti to do? With French warships in their harbor and no international allies willing to help, they agreed, because honestly, what choice did they have? So Haiti took out loans from French banks to pay the French government. They paid and paid and paid and paid and continued to pay. Generations of Haitian people were paying this debt. Infrastructure that would have and should have been built, schools, hospitals, roads, they weren't built because the money that they would have used was going to France. So Haiti finally finished paying this original debt in 1947. 1947. So, yeah, long time after they had declared independence. So the United States, the country that declared all men are created equal, they didn't recognize Haiti as an independent nation until 1862, 58 years after independence. And the reason was explicit. American slaveholders did not want to recognize a country built by formerly enslaved people. They were terrified of the idea spreading. So Thomas Jefferson, who, if you recall, had enthusiastically supported the French Revolution, called the Haitian Revolution a combustion that had to be contained. Yeah. So while France was demanding ransom and America was refusing recognition, Haiti literally stood alone, diplomatically isolated, economically strangled, being made to pay for the audacity of being free. And this is not ancient history. The debt, 1947, the debt, the isolation, the economic punishment, it really shaped Haiti in ways that are still felt today. So when you hear people ask why Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, this is not the whole answer, but this is definitely a big part of the answer, a significant part of the answer. They were literally punished for winning, for claiming their natural right to freedom. So the Haitian Revolution is arguably, but in my opinion, one of the most extraordinary events in human history. And it definitely deserves to be taught fully, honestly, and with all the complexity, all of the triumphs, all of the tragedy. It deserves to be in every history class, every textbook, every conversation about freedom and democracy, and not only what those words actually mean, but how they're envisioned, how they're utilized throughout history. And so here's what I hope you take away from this episode, that 500,000 people had been told by law and by force that they were property, looked at that lie and refused it. They organized, strategized, sacrificed, and built something the world had never seen before. So they did not wait to be freed. They freed themselves. And the world has been trying to make them pay for that ever since. So that's the story. That's when women walked. And the people who walked before all of us. So thank you for listening. Welcome back. Season 2, episode 1 of When Women Walked. And as always, if this episode moved you, made you think, please share it. Send it to someone who you think might want to or needs to hear it. And yeah, let's take a sneak peek into our next episode. I'm very excited about this. So next episode, we're going to the South China Sea. And we're talking about a woman who commanded 80,000 pirates. Yes, you heard that right. Pirates, swashbucklers, and literally made 3 empires beg for peace. So if you listened to the reels and whatnot on my Instagram this week, then you already know a little bit about her. But the full story, it's exciting. It's juicy. So I will see you next episode. Stay curious, stay unbothered, and please never stop asking who they left out.